Hey, Ashlyn, nice to see you.
Hey Mindy, it's good to see you again. What are we working on today?
So I'm working on, it's actually something that I already turned in for credit. It was a class assignment, but I'm trying to work on it further and maybe target a couple journals for publication.
Okay,
Um,
great.
I have two in mind, but I haven't quite narrowed them down. They're pretty similar. Both of them welcome, so it's in the writing discipline. They're both papers for my major, which is writing. But these two journals specifically are really welcome prose and like creative voice and personal voice. So this essay is definitely in the style of like a
Okay.
personal narrative, but I'm
Personal narrative,
incorporating
great.
research obviously, and yeah.
That sounds really interesting. Are you familiar with, before we get started, do you know what the publication requirements are for these journals? Like, are you familiar? Okay, great.
Yeah, I'm at like 3,000 words, and I think I need to, or maybe I'm at like, all I know is I need like 500-ish more words to meet
Okay.
like the minimum word count of both of them. And then I think both of them do MLA style. If not, I can change it to APA. Citation style isn't really what I'm worried about. I have at the writing lab, they have the handbooks, so I feel
Mhm.
comfortable using the handbooks to change to APA style if I need to.
We love hearing that.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and I can
How,
always come back if I like really want that. But I think what I don't even know what I really want, like how to move forward with it. It's like a complete draft. Obviously
okay.
needs some more words, but I guess I just want like a second opinion on like places where it feels really coherent, places where it
Okay.
feels like I'm stretching or maybe need more explanation.
Okay, so you want me to read through what you have so far and
Yeah.
just kind of we can talk through my impressions, what I think is working, what do I think it's about. Do you want any help with generating those last 500 words, or does that feel like something you can do on your own time?
I do feel like I can get the words on the page. It's just sort
Okay.
of knowing which words to get on the page, like which
Okay.
ideas.
So let's start with the existing words in the existing draft, correct?
Yeah,
Great. Well, do you feel comfortable sharing your screen so that I
I
can
do.
read through the paper with you?
And then, yeah, before I share screen, also like because it's a personal narrative,
Mhm.
I'm talking about the paper is about my experience in graduate school and like
Okay.
entering the discipline of rhetoric and writing and how that's kind of like an adjustment. Um, and the original like call for papers it was written for was like the theme was like transparency and transparency about like grad school and higher education. And then that CFP didn't work out, but I do want to still use it. But because it uses so much like personal voice, I don't know, it does still feel like embarrassing in some points, like I'm being really vulnerable. And like sometimes I know some places the vulnerability feels good, but other times it feels kind of like tacky, or I don't know if
Okay.
it's just like cringy. So, um, yeah, that's like I guess my warning or
No,
disclaimer.
I mean, I think personal voice, like balance with research is a really like wonderful place for like kind of this blend of like academic and creative nonfiction. And I actually know we can talk through at the end of our session, like some writers that I know that do it well.
Oh, okay, cool.
Like Olivia Lang pops up for top of mind and she picks a topic and writes an entire novel about it. And it's part of it is personal narrative, and then a huge component of it is research and then kind
Mhm.
of tying together. So yeah, so let's look at the paper, and if you want to point out those moments, we can kind of talk about the balancing of that voice with the research,
Okay,
and how to sort of manage the reader's and things like that.
okay. Let me share screen.
You are frozen on my end.
Okay.
Technical difficulties are always part of, an online lab, so we definitely have the capability to manage it. Okay,
So
let me get
I did start out this paper with like some etymology of this word nostalgia that I'm working with, which felt like a good launching point the whole
Okay.
paper is sort of about this idea of like nostalgia in grad school. And so I had to like trace like, what do I mean by nostalgia, and incorporate research there. And I think it's a helpful introduction, but I do know that starting on like a definition of a word is sometimes tacky. So,
Mhm. Well, why don't I read through it and then kind of give you my impressions of what I think this essay is going to be about, and then we can kind of talk through if that's correct.
okay.
And if it is correct, we can kind of get in there and get a little bit more nitpicky if we want to move around or complicate the definition of the word. Okay, so do you want me to read out loud so that you can also hear it, or do you want me to just read this first paragraph quietly?
I think I would just prefer silent reading.
Okay. Okay. Let me read this and then we will talk through it.
Okay, I'll read along with you.
Okay, sounds great. Okay, great. I like this a lot. I think so far this paragraph feels like the goal is to establish kind of the similarities and differences between the different cultural uses of nostalgia, but that it all kind of has like circles back to a common meaning.
Mhm.
I think the one thing, again, like I might be coming at it more from a creative nonfiction stance than what your goal is. So correct me, but I think what we want here is to introduce very lightly the personal voice, right?
Yeah,
So
I agree with that.
if we're starting with the academic voice, the kind of what how we're going to end in the personal voice at the end of the essay, right? Like
Absolutely.
that's so we want to go ahead and have that personal voice poke out a little bit within this text.
Yeah, okay.
And essentially like kind of it's basically the basic like a b kind of plot structure, even though the plot can also be like stylistic or rhythmic. So it's like if we're starting in A and we're ending in B, then it's probably like A B B B B, right? So we want to go ahead and introduce that B beat in this first paragraph. So that would be my main suggestion, is to figure out how to complicate the sort of rigidity of like defining nostalgia with kind of potentially the personal interpretation of it. And it can be like a sentence or two. And it can be because you're kind of speaking about liminality and abstract. The voice can kind of be a little bit abstract too. So that would be like just to kind of massage this text and look for ways to insert your voice, or the voice interpreting the facts as well. Because that's part of the cool thing about nonfiction, even in an academic setting, is that you're also like the narrator that is writing is oftentimes the narrator that's looking back and reflecting on the text, or if there are scenes that you're going to put in here when you were a little bit younger, even if it was like a year ago, that narrative voice will probably comment on that younger experience, right?
Mhm.
And that same kind of psychic distance can be used when you're weaving in the information, the facts that are the research that's going to go in this as well.
Yeah, I think right in the next couple of paragraphs, I agree. I'm seeing this place as a maybe somewhere that I can like reflect on that and integrate my personal voice just a little bit
Yeah.
earlier. I want to go on in a second
Yeah,
where I
let's
start
do
to
it.
do that, but I had one more question just about like I guess like the flow of my language or like how much it makes sense or grammatically. I have this sentence, a French linguist, philosopher, and rhetorician, Cassin investigates the word nostalgia in that order. So by in that order, I'm referring to,
Say that. No,
oh, sorry, I froze. Okay, am I
that's
unfrozen?
okay. Okay, now you're back.
Okay. I have this sentence, a French linguist, philosopher, and rhetorician, Cassin investigates the word nostalgia in that order meaning linguistically, philosophically, and then rhetorically. Does that like in that order make sense that it's referring to these?
It didn't the first read. It does
Okay.
now that I know. So I would
Yeah.
maybe in that order of discipline, like, or in
Mhm.
that order of concentration, or just something that kind of goes back and cues the reader like back up if they need a refresher.
Okay. I'm gonna add, I'll work on that after our session. But yeah, I could tell that I was like, I know what I mean, but I don't think that's coming across.
Good catch. Good edit.
That's been a really tricky one. Okay. So now is when I try and start like connecting nostalgia to where it's happened for me, like as a writer in school.
Okay.
Um, oh, did this sentence also make sense? Like, but the liminality itself is not what makes someone feel nostalgia. Their desire to return that prefigures and is disrupted by liminality is. I feel like stylistically it felt helpful
To
to
have the medical.
put that in parentheses, but does it feel necessary or helpful?
Let me read it again. But the liminality itself is not what makes someone feel nostalgic. Their desire to return does. That prefigures and is disrupted by liminality. I actually think the parenthetical kind of muddies it up a little bit, the
Okay, I
clarity.
agree.
Um,
It's one of those stylistic things. One of the writers I really like is Sarah Ahmed, and
mhm.
she's a philosopher, and she writes very simply, but like fully explains her concepts and like has a way of jumping back to them and like connecting them and then jumping ahead. And it's so crazy how she can do so much with such simple writing. And I feel like I try and mimic that. And I feel like I
Yeah.
try and mimic that a lot in this essay, but it falls flat a lot of times.
No, I don't think so at all. I mean, that's also like borrowing, like kind of borrowing from a writer we really like is how we kind of develop our own style. So I think that's a great technique. And probably the reason why it falls flat, and I'm quoting that just because that's not my experience of this writing, is because you're still kind of working through your own voice too. So like,
Yeah.
and I actually think parentheticals are really interesting
Mhm.
if you wanted to weave them through in other places, especially if you're kind of working through this hybrid of like research and then voice. It could be like the voice kind of bubbling up sometimes in the research.
Mhm.
Just a fun thing to keep in mind if that works, if that sounds inspiring to you.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so I'm going to read these next two paragraphs and then let's talk through them.
Okay.
Okay. I think this is great. I'm trying to think through something really fast.
Okay. I'm also
Um,
wondering, this paragraph makes me uncomfortable how short it
is
is.
there
So I
anything
kind of
specifically in these paragraphs that you want to knock on?
Sorry,
Say that
you
again,
glitched
sorry.
for a second. Okay.
Okay.
This first paragraph made me uncomfortable because of how short it was. So I kind of wonder like if it works okay as one paragraph.
So it's funny. I think what I was trying to think of is like, you know, we have this information in the first technically introductory paragraph, right? And then we have an introduction in the second paragraph of a separate text. And
Mhm.
it almost makes me wonder if Jean and a separate Jean or Jean?
I think it's
Jean and
just Jean.
Jean. Okay. If that becomes like, is this the only time you talk about this piece of work, or is it?
No, I talk about both Cassant and Jean at the end of the essay.
So I feel like he should come up in the beginning as almost like a literary avatar or mirror or foil. I'm not sure like how exactly the narrator ends up perceiving Jean by the end. Right now they're obviously like the narrator relates to him, but I think that it should come up probably in the